Have you ever stopped to think about how politics can shape the news you consume daily? In the grand theater of our world, where information is the leading act, news bias plays a crucial yet often overlooked role. It's the invisible director, subtly guiding the narrative we digest every day. The concept of news bias isn't a new phenomenon. It has been part and parcel of our media landscape since the dawn of news reporting. It's the selective representation of events and stories, the subtle shaping of narratives to fit a particular agenda. News bias is the lens through which we see the world, and it's about time we gave it a closer look. Now, politics and news have always been strange bedfellows. They dance a delicate tango, each influencing the other in an intricate give and take. The realm of politics has a profound influence on how news is reported, and in turn, the news shapes our political perceptions. This symbiotic relationship is the crux of news bias. Let's take a moment to consider how this works. News outlets are, at their core, businesses. They cater to a specific audience, and this audience has certain political leanings. To keep their viewership numbers high, these outlets tend to align their news narratives with the political bias of their audience. It's a simple case of supply and demand, but there's more to it than just economics. News outlets are also influenced by their owners, their sponsors, and the various political entities they interact with. These influences can subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, color the news we consume. The end result? A news narrative that leans one way or another, a narrative that is, in essence, biased. And so, we find ourselves in a world where the news we consume is often tailored to fit political agendas. It's a world where the line between fact and fiction can sometimes blur, where the truth is often more complex than the narrative presented to us. So the question begs, can we ever trust the news? As we journey further into this intriguing world of news bias, remember this: knowledge is power. The more we understand about the mechanisms behind news bias, the better equipped we are to navigate this complex media landscape. To understand news bias, one needs to delve into the intricate mechanisms behind news production. So let's roll up our sleeves and get to it. Imagine a bustling newsroom where journalists are hard at work, sifting through countless stories. Now, not every story makes it to your breakfast table or evening screen. It's a process of selection, and this is where bias often starts to creep in. Unconsciously or otherwise, editorial teams might favor stories that align with their political leanings. For instance, a news outlet with a conservative bent might choose to report extensively on issues like national security or fiscal responsibility. On the other hand, a liberal-leaning outlet might focus more on social justice or climate change. But it's not just about which stories get picked. It's also about how they're framed. Let's say two news outlets are covering a protest. One might describe it as a riot, focusing on the chaos and property damage. The other might call it a demonstration, highlighting the cause behind the protest and the peaceful majority. Same event, different frames, different impressions. And let's not forget about the use of sources. Journalists often rely on experts to provide context or opinions. But who gets to be the expert and whose voice is amplified or muted can also reflect the outlet's political stance. Take the debate on climate change, for instance. Some outlets might repeatedly feature climate skeptics, thereby creating a false impression of scientific disagreement, when in reality, the vast majority of scientists agree that human activity is causing global warming. These are just a few examples of how news bias can creep in. But the key point is this: news doesn't just mirror reality. It's a constructed representation of reality, shaped by various decisions and factors, many of them influenced by political leanings. As you see, news bias isn't accidental, but a deliberate act. It's a complex dance of selection, framing, and sourcing, all happening behind the scenes of your daily news bulletin. So the next time you read a news article or watch a news report, remember to ask, what's not being said? Who's telling the story? And why might they be telling it this way? Did you know that a headline can change your perception of a news story entirely? Yes, you heard it right. Headlines, those few bold words at the top of your news article, possess an enormous power. They have the ability to shape your understanding of the news before you even delve into the body of the story. Let's consider a simple example. Imagine two headlines for the same news story. The first one reads, government fails to reach budget agreement, while the second states, government stands firm on budget principles. Although the fact remains the same, the government did not agree on the budget, the interpretation varies drastically. The first headline suggests a failure on the part of the government, while the second presents it as a resolute stance on principles. This is what we call the framing effect, a phenomenon where the way information is presented can significantly influence how it is perceived. Headlines are the master framers in the world of news. They can tilt your perspective, trigger your emotions, and even influence your decisions. Now you might ask, why is this important? Well, in this fast-paced world, people often skim through the news, glancing only at the headlines. A study revealed that roughly 6 in 10 people admit to reading just the headlines and not the complete articles. This means, for a majority of readers, the headline is the story. Can we trust these powerful lines of text? That's a tough question. Headlines, like any other part of the news, can be biased. They can be overly sensational, misleading, or even completely false. Therefore, it's crucial to approach them with a discerning eye. Remember, a headline is like the tip of the iceberg. It reveals only a fraction of the story beneath. To understand the complete picture, you need to dive deeper, beyond the headline, into the heart of the story. In conclusion, it's clear that headlines aren't just a summary, but a powerful tool for manipulation. So the next time you read a news headline, pause, think, and then proceed. Images speak 1,000 words, and language paints vivid pictures. But what happens when they're used to mislead? Let's delve into the powerful role of images and language in shaping the news we consume. They aren't merely decorative elements. They're strategic tools used to influence our perception of reality, often with a subtle touch. Consider the images first. They can be manipulated or selected to evoke certain emotions, influencing our understanding of the story. For instance, a peaceful protest could be portrayed as violent just by choosing pictures that showcase isolated incidents of conflict. This simple switch can change the narrative completely, causing us to view the protesters as aggressors rather than advocates for change. Now let's talk about language. The words used in a news article or broadcast can dramatically alter our interpretation of events. Words have connotations, and the choice of one word over another can subtly shift our perception. For example, describing a group of people as freedom fighters or rebels can drastically change our opinion about them. Moreover, the framing of a story, the context it's put in, and the details highlighted or omitted can all sway our understanding. A story about a natural disaster can be framed as a tale of human resilience or a narrative of government incompetence, depending on the language used. Furthermore, euphemisms and loaded language can be employed to either soften the impact of a negative story or to amplify a positive one. For example, a military invasion can be referred to as a liberation or an occupation, depending on the bias of the news source. So when we consume news, we need to be aware of these manipulations. We need to question the images and language used, not taking them at face value, but digging deeper to understand the story from multiple perspectives. In conclusion, images and language are powerful tools that can be used to distort the truth and promote bias in news. They aren't just decorative elements, but strategic tools in news bias. So next time you consume news, remember to look beyond the surface and think critically about what you're being shown and told. News bias doesn't just affect our understanding of events, but it changes the very fabric of our society. Consider this. News is our window to the world. It's how we learn about happenings beyond our immediate sphere. But what if that window is tinted with bias? It's not just our view that's skewed. It begins to impact the entire room. One of the most significant impacts is polarization. Bias in news can cause a deep divide among people, fueling an us versus them mentality. This happens when news outlets present information from a particular viewpoint, often aligning with a political ideology. People consuming this biased news may end up reinforcing their existing beliefs, leading to a society that's more divided than ever. Then there's the issue of misinformation. Bias isn't always explicit. Sometimes it's subtle, creeping in through the selective presentation of facts or the emphasis on certain narratives over others. This can lead to a distorted understanding of events, creating a society that's misinformed and unable to make sound decisions. The spread of misinformation is like a game of broken telephone. The original message gets distorted as it passes through various biased channels, and by the time it reaches the public, it's a different story altogether. Finally, there's a growing distrust in media. When people repeatedly encounter biased news, they may start questioning the credibility of all news sources. This is dangerous as it can lead to cynicism and apathy, undermining the role of journalism as a watchdog for democracy. So what we have is a society that's divided, misinformed, and distrustful, all thanks to news bias. It's a ripple effect, each wave amplifying the impact of the last, causing a societal shift that's hard to reverse. News bias, then, isn't just a media issue, but a societal problem. It's a complex web that weaves itself into the fabric of our society, altering the way we perceive, react, and interact. It's high time we address it, for the sake of a more informed, united, and trusting society. So how can we navigate this sea of biased news and find the truth? First and foremost, diversify your news sources. Consuming news from a variety of outlets can provide a more balanced viewpoint. This doesn't just mean flipping between different television channels. Consider exploring international news outlets, independent journalists, and even social media platforms where citizen journalists are breaking news in real time. Also, it's essential to understand the difference between news and opinion. In an ideal world, news is objective, presenting just the facts, while opinion is subjective, filled with personal beliefs and biases. Unfortunately, these lines often blur, so it's crucial to distinguish between them. Next up, critical thinking is your best friend. Question everything. Who is the source? What is their intent? Do they have a particular agenda or bias? Are they presenting facts, or is it just speculation? Analyzing the news in this way can help you see beyond the surface and understand the underlying bias. Moreover, don't be afraid to fact-check. In this era of instant information, it's easy to verify facts with a few clicks. There are numerous fact-checking websites available that can help you differentiate between real news and fake news. Consider the language used in the news. Is it emotional or neutral? Does it incite fear or anger? Biased news often uses manipulative language to sway opinions. Recognizing this can help you read between the lines. Finally, remember that everyone has biases, including journalists and news outlets. Being aware of this can help you approach news with a critical eye. Navigating news bias isn't about finding a completely unbiased source. That's a unicorn in today's media landscape. It's about understanding the bias, seeing through it, and making an informed judgment. While news bias is prevalent, it's not unbeatable. In the end, understanding news bias is the key to consuming news responsibly. It's the key that unlocks the door to a world of informed decision-making, a world where we can challenge the narratives that are handed to us and seek out the truth. Let's recap what we've unpacked today. We delved into the intriguing world of news bias, exploring how it subtly yet powerfully shapes the information we consume every day. We've discovered that news bias isn't just about what is reported, but also what is not, and how the framing of a story can alter our perception. We then journeyed through the mechanisms of news bias, learning how headlines, images, and language are all used as tools to sway our views. The power of a headline, the choice of an image, the use of emotive language, all these elements play a pivotal role in steering our understanding of a news story. We also discussed the broader societal implications of news bias. We saw how it can polarize societies, fuel misinformation, and even influence the course of history. It's a sobering reminder of the power that news organizations hold and the responsibility they bear. Navigating news bias is no easy task. It requires us to stay vigilant, to question our sources, and to seek out diverse perspectives. But as we've seen, it's an essential skill in today's media-saturated world. In this digital age, where news is at our fingertips, it's more crucial than ever to be discerning consumers. It's not just about staying informed, it's about understanding the context, questioning the sources, and making up our own mind. So as we wrap up this journey into the world of news bias, remember to stay informed, stay critical. Don't just consume the news, question it. And remember, the most powerful tool against bias is a well-informed mind. Stay informed, stay critical. And remember, always question the news you consume. Subscribe for more insights into the world of news.